Olympic National Forest, July 17, 2018. The Hargrove family parents, Seth and Andrea, along with Lily and her 14-year-old brother Ethan, were 4 days into their week-long camping trip. They had traveled from their home in Portland, Oregon, to explore the ancient forests of Washington's Olympic Peninsula, a summer tradition they had maintained since the children were toddlers. According to later statements, the family had spent the morning hiking the Hurricane Ridge Trail before returning to their campsite at Heart o' the Hills for lunch. The afternoon plan was simple. While Seth and Ethan went fishing at a nearby stream, Andrea would catch up on her reading, and Lily, an aspiring naturalist who carried a well-worn field journal everywhere, would explore the immediate area around the campsite to document the local flora. She knew the rules, Andrea would later tell investigators, her voice hollow with the particular grief that only parents who have lost children can understand. Stay within shouting distance. Don't go past the big Douglas fir with the split trunk. Be back before the shadows get long. But as the afternoon shadows stretched across the forest floor, Lily didn't return. At first, Andrea wasn't concerned. Her daughter was responsible, methodical traits uncommon in most children her age. When Seth and Ethan returned from fishing around 4:30 p.m., however, a sense of unease began to settle over the family. We called for her, then we started searching, Seth recounted in the first of many interviews. We figured she'd just lost track of time. Lily gets absorbed in things, especially when she's documenting plants or watching animals. By 5:15 p.m., their calls had grown more frantic. By 5:45, Seth had hiked to the ranger station a mile away to report his daughter missing. By nightfall, the first search parties were combing the woods with flashlights, calling Lily's name into the darkness. Park Ranger Teresa Valdez was the first official to respond. With 23 years of experience in Olympic National Forest, she knew the terrain intimately and understood its dangers. In these cases, time is critical, Valdez explained, especially with a child. The forest doesn't forgive mistakes, and even in summer, the nights get cold enough for hypothermia to be a concern. What began as a localized search effort quickly expanded. By morning, 35 personnel from multiple agencies were involved, including wilderness search and rescue teams with tracking dogs. Volunteers from nearby communities joined the effort, creating a search grid that expanded outward from the Hargroves campsite. The first troubling sign came when one of the dogs picked up Lily's scent from clothing provided by her parents. The animal followed the trail approximately 200 yards northeast of the campsite, directly into a dense thicket of salmonberry bushes. There, the dog became agitated, circling and whining, before leading handlers to a small clearing where the scent abruptly disappeared. It was as if she'd vanished into thin air, said canine handler Michael Reeves. The dogs were confused. That's not typical. Usually, when a scent trail ends, it's because the person got into a vehicle or crossed water. But there was no road access there, no streams or rivers. On the ground in that clearing, searchers found Lily's field journal. The last entry, time-stamped at 3:17 p.m., detailed a cluster of chanterelle mushrooms she'd discovered. The writing was neat, methodical, showing no signs of distress or hurry. The journal was intact, unweathered, suggesting it hadn't been exposed to the elements for long. But of Lily herself, there was no trace. As days passed, the search intensified. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras scanned the forest canopy. Professional trackers analyzed every broken twig and displaced leaf. Cave rescue specialists explored underground formations in the area. The FBI sent agents specializing in child abductions, though they acknowledged there was no evidence of human involvement. We have to consider every possibility, Special Agent Kimberly Navarro told reporters on day 4. But the location is extremely remote. There are no roads nearby. No one reported seeing any suspicious individuals in the area. At this point, we're treating this as a missing person case potentially involving natural elements or wildlife. The word hung in the air, unspoken but understood by the local search teams. Olympic National Forest was home to significant populations of cougar, black bear, and wolves. Though attacks on humans were rare, they weren't unprecedented. And a solitary child, small for her age as Lily was, would make an easy target for a predator. The discovery on day 5 shifted the investigation's focus irrevocably. Approximately half a mile from where Lily's journal was found, a search team located a torn piece of fabric caught on a thorny bush. Lab tests would later confirm it matched the light blue t-shirt Lily had been wearing. More concerning were the traces of blood on the fabric, human blood, Lily's type. Wildlife biologist Dr. Cameron Reed was brought in to examine the evidence. The tear pattern is consistent with animal claws or teeth, he stated after examining the fabric. Not conclusively, but it's a possibility we have to consider. 2 days later, just as hope was beginning to fade, another discovery. A single child-sized hiking boot, partially buried under forest debris in a ravine nearly 3/4 of a mile from the campsite. The boot was confirmed to be Lily's by her parents. Inside, forensic technicians found trace amounts of blood and several strands of Lily's hair. The boot showed clear signs of animal interaction, Dr. Reed explained. There were puncture marks consistent with canine teeth, likely a cougar or wolf. The spacing and depth suggest a large adult predator. The case was rapidly evolving from a search and rescue operation to a recovery mission. The evidence, though circumstantial, painted a grim picture. A young girl, alone in the woods, encountering one of the forest's apex predators. Media coverage intensified. Cable news networks dispatched reporters to the Olympic Peninsula. The hashtag Find Lily trended nationally. The Hargroves, previously private people who limited their children's social media presence, found themselves thrust into the national spotlight, their grief playing out before millions. "We just want our daughter back," Andrea said during one press conference, her husband's arm around her shoulders, their son standing silently beside them. "Whatever happened, whatever condition she's in, we need to bring her home." Wildlife officials began setting traps in the area where Lily's belongings were found. Trail cameras were installed. Rangers armed with tranquilizer guns patrolled, looking for predators exhibiting unusual behavior. The forest that had been the Hargrove Summer Sanctuary for years had transformed into something menacing, a green labyrinth concealing their daughter's fate. On day 9, a breakthrough. A trail camera captured images of a large male cougar dragging an unidentifiable object through the underbrush approximately 2 miles from the Hargroves campsite. The photos, taken in the pre-dawn hours, were grainy but unmistakable. A tawny mountain lion moving purposefully with something in its jaws. Wildlife officials quickly located and tracked the cougar, eventually tranquilizing the animal, a healthy male, approximately 8 years old, weighing 140 pounds. Though the examination revealed no direct evidence linking the cougar to Lily, experts noted fresh scratches on its face and one partially broken canine tooth. "These injuries could be consistent with a struggle," explained Dr. Reed. "Cougars typically avoid humans, but there are documented cases of attacks, particularly on smaller individuals like children who might trigger their prey response." As officials debated euthanizing the cougar to conduct a more thorough examination, a private drone operator volunteering in the search made a discovery that seemed to confirm the worst fears. Flying over a remote area inaccessible to ground teams, the drone captured footage of what appeared to be scattered clothing matching Lily's description near a rocky outcropping known locally as Cougar's Rest. When a specialized team reached the location the following day, they found Lily's shorts, her other boot, and disturbingly, her backpack, the contents scattered across an area roughly 20 feet in diameter. The backpack had been torn open, not by human hands but by powerful claws or teeth. Nearby, investigators discovered disturbed ground and vegetation consistent with what experts called a kill site, a place where large predators take down prey. Medical examiner Dr. Sarah Jeffries, who accompanied the recovery team, provided the assessment everyone dreaded. Based on the evidence at the scene, including blood spatter patterns and disturbance of the ground, we're looking at a wildlife predation event. The scattered nature of the belongings, the drag marks leading away from the site, these are consistent with cougar behavior. The cougar was euthanized and a necropsy performed. While no definitive human remains were found in its digestive tract, several long brown hairs matching Lily's were discovered in its claws. DNA testing would later confirm they belonged to the missing girl. On day 14, Olympic National Forest officials, in conjunction with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, officially classified Lily Hargrove's disappearance as a fatal wildlife attack. Search operations were scaled back to recovery efforts focused on finding remains. While we cannot state with absolute certainty what happened without a body, Sheriff Marcus Coleman told reporters, choosing his words carefully out of respect for the family, the evidence strongly indicates a predatory attack. The working theory is that Lily encountered a cougar while documenting plants in her journal. The animal attacked dragged her to a secondary location at Cougar's Rest, and then likely to a tertiary location, as predators often do with their prey. For most involved in the search, the conclusion, though tragic, provided a certain grim closure. Lily had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, the victim of a rare but documented natural phenomenon. Olympic National Forest implemented new warning systems, expanded cougar awareness programs, and temporarily closed certain trails to allow wildlife officials to assess the predator population. The Hargroves, devastated beyond words, returned to Portland to plan a memorial service. The media began to move on. The hashtag stopped trending. The reporters packed up their equipment and left the peninsula. The story of Lily Hargrove, the bright, curious girl who loved documenting the natural world, was filed away as a tragic reminder of nature's unpredictable dangers. But for one person, the case was far from closed. Margaret Cooper had been a homicide detective with the Portland Police Bureau for 17 years before retiring to write true crime books. She had followed the Hargrove case with professional interest, partly because the family lived in Portland, but mostly because something about the official conclusion didn't sit right with her. Predator attacks leave evidence, she told her former partner over coffee. 3 weeks after the official search had been suspended, hair, tissue, extensive blood. Even when the remains are consumed, there's more left behind than what they found. And the scattered personal effects? Too theatrical. Too deliberate. You're seeing shadows where there aren't any, Maggie, her ex-partner replied. Sometimes the simplest explanation is the right one. The girl went too far from camp, a cougar saw an opportunity, and nature took its course. Tragic, but not mysterious. Cooper couldn't let it go. With her background in homicide investigation and her current work as a true crime author, she had developed an instinct for cases that didn't add up. The Hargrove case nagged at her consciousness, demanding attention. She reached out to the family, expecting rejection. Instead, she found Andrea Hargrove surprisingly receptive. There's something wrong with their explanation, Andrea said during their first meeting at the Hargroves' Portland home. The walls were covered with photos of Lily smiling with her field journal, examining insects with a magnifying glass, standing proudly beside tide pools during previous camping trips. Lily knew about cougars. She wouldn't have approached one, and she wouldn't have run if she saw one. She knew exactly what to do in that situation. Seth was less convinced. "I don't know what good this does," he said, his voice betraying the exhaustion of grief. The authorities investigated. They found her things, her blood. They found the animal. What are we supposed to think happened? I'm not sure yet, Cooper admitted, but I'd like your permission to look into some things. to ask some questions that maybe weren't asked during the initial investigation. The Hargroves, despite Seth's reservations, agreed. For Andrea, it was a lifeline, something to focus on besides the crushing grief. For Seth, it was a concession to his wife's need for absolute certainty. For Cooper, it was the beginning of an investigation that would challenge everything authorities thought they knew about what happened to Lily Hargrove. Cooper's first step was to examine the official reports. Using contacts from her days with the Portland PD, she obtained copies of the search documentation, forensic analyses, and wildlife expert testimonies. She spread them across her home office, creating a timeline that tracked every discovery, every decision point in the investigation. The official narrative was cohesive, she had to admit. Lily wandered too far from camp. She encountered a cougar. The animal attacked, dragging her first to the clearing where her journal was found, then to Cougar's Rest where her clothing was scattered, and finally to some undiscovered location where it consumed its prey. But as Cooper delved deeper into the reports, inconsistencies emerged. The blood found on Lily's clothing and boot was minimal droplets rather than the significant amount expected in a violent animal attack. The torn fabric, while consistent with animal claws, showed no tooth marks or saliva traces that would typically be present in a predator's grip. Most troubling was the timeline. According to Andrea's statement, Lily left the campsite around 2 p.m. Her last journal entry was time-stamped 3:17 p.m. The distance from the campsite to where the journal was found was approximately 200 yards at 10-minute walk at most for a healthy 12-year-old. What had Lily been doing for over an hour? And if she had been attacked shortly after making her journal entry, why were her belongings found scattered across such a wide area? Cooper decided to visit Olympic National Forest herself. Though months had passed since Lily's disappearance, she wanted to see the locations firsthand to understand the terrain and distances involved. She contacted Ranger Valdez, who had been first on the scene and had coordinated much of the search effort. "I expected this," Valdez said when Cooper explained her interest. They stood at the Hargroves' former campsite, now occupied by a young couple completely unaware of its tragic history. Someone always questions the official finding in these cases. But I've been working these woods for over 2 decades, and I've seen what predators can do. The evidence was clear. Clear enough for a grieving family? Cooper asked. Clear enough for a 12-year-old girl who won't have a future? Valdez's expression softened. Look, I understand the need for certainty, but sometimes nature doesn't give us that luxury. We found her journal, her clothing, her blood. We found a cougar in the immediate area with her hair in its claws. What more definitive evidence could there be short of? Well, you know. Cooper convinced Valdez to walk her through the search areas from the campsite to the journal location, then to Cougar's Rest where the scattered clothing was found. As they hiked, Cooper noted the distances, the terrain, the sight lines. Something wasn't adding up. How long would it take a cougar to drag a body from the journal site to Cougar's Rest? She asked as they stood at the rocky outcropping where Lily's backpack and shorts had been discovered. Valdez considered the question. Depends on the route it took. Direct line, maybe 20 minutes. But predators rarely travel in straight lines when they're carrying prey. They look for cover, for secure paths, and they typically consume their kills immediately, right? Or cache them somewhere protected. Generally, yes. They might make an initial kill, feed briefly, then move the remains to a more secure location. So why drag a victim all the way to Cougar's Rest? Scatter their belongings and then drag them somewhere else? Cooper asked. Why not just feed at the initial kill site near the journal? Or if it was disturbed there, why not consume the prey at Cougar's Rest instead of apparently scattering evidence and moving again? Valdez didn't have a ready answer. Animal behavior isn't always predictable. Maybe it was disturbed multiple times. Maybe there were other predators in the area it was trying to avoid. Cooper nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead. The cougar theory, which had seemed so solid in the official reports, was beginning to show cracks when examined from a behavioral perspective. Back in Portland, Cooper reached out to Dr. Eleanor Frost, a wildlife biologist specializing in predator behavior, whom she'd quoted in a previous book. After explaining the case, she asked for Frost's professional assessment. "Based on what you've described, I'd have some questions about the cougar theory," Dr. Frost said cautiously. "The scatter pattern of belongings doesn't align with typical predator behavior. Mountain lions are ambush predators. They attack quickly, kill efficiently, and typically drag prey to a secluded area immediately. They don't play with non-food items like backpacks or clothing, and they certainly don't arrange them in a way that makes them easily discoverable. So the scattered clothing at Cougar's Rest seems staged," Dr. Frost finished. "If I were investigating, I'd want to know if the blood evidence was consistent with arterial spray from an attack or if it appeared to have been applied to the items. And I'd be very interested in the condition of the cougar they euthanized. A predator that has recently fed on human remains would show evidence beyond just a few hairs in its claws." Armed with this expert opinion, Cooper returned to the case files with renewed scrutiny. She requested the complete necropsy report on the euthanized cougar, which hadn't been included in the materials she'd initially received. What she found confirmed Dr. Frost's suspicions. The animal's stomach contents revealed a recently consumed deer, but no human remains. Its broken canine tooth showed signs of previous healing, indicating the injury had occurred weeks, not days, before its capture. Cooper was now convinced that the cougar, while present in the area, had not been responsible for Lily's disappearance. But if not the mountain lion, then what or who was? She began examining the visitor logs for Olympic National Forest during the week of Lily's disappearance. The Hard O' the Hills campground had been at approximately 60% capacity, not crowded, but certainly not deserted. Several dozen hikers, campers, and day visitors had been in the vicinity. Had any of them noticed something unusual? Had any of them been overlooked in the initial investigation's focus on the wildlife theory? Cooper's examination of the visitor logs revealed a name that triggered her investigative instinct: Martin Ridley, a wildlife photographer who had been camping at Hard O' the Hills the same week as the Hargroves. According to the logs, Ridley had checked out the morning after Lily's disappearance, several days earlier than his scheduled departure. A quick internet search yielded Ridley's professional website showcasing stunning photographs of North American predators with a particular focus on big cats. His bio noted he'd spent 20 years documenting the misunderstood apex predators of the continent and had published 3 coffee table books on the subject. Cooper contacted Jefferson County Sheriff's Department to ask if Ridley had been interviewed during the initial investigation. The deputy who took her call sounded defensive. "We spoke with everyone in the immediate area at the time of the disappearance," he said. Mr. Ridley informed rangers he was leaving due to the commotion of the search operations disrupting his work. He was photographing nocturnal wildlife behavior and needed quiet conditions. Did anyone verify his whereabouts during the approximate time of Lily's disappearance? "Ma'am, we had no reason to suspect foul play. All evidence pointed to a wildlife incident. We didn't conduct alibi checks on random campers." Cooper thanked the deputy and hung up, unsatisfied. She located Ridley's contact information through his publisher and called him directly. He answered on the 4th ring. "I was wondering when someone would call," he said after she identified herself. His voice was measured, professional. "I followed the case in the news. Terrible tragedy. I actually photographed that same cougar 2 days before the incident. That's what I wanted to ask you about," Cooper said, not revealing her suspicions. As an expert in big cat behavior, did the official explanation match your understanding of how cougars typically hunt and feed? A pause on the line. "Not entirely," Ridley admitted. "The scattered belongings struck me as unusual. Cougars don't typically play with non-food items. But I'm not a forensic expert," just a photographer. Would you be willing to meet and discuss your observations? Your expertise could be valuable. Another pause, longer this time. I'm currently in Montana on assignment, but I could speak by phone again next week. Leave your number and I'll call when I'm at a location with better reception. Cooper provided her contact information, noting that Ridley hadn't asked why she was investigating a case officially attributed to wildlife predation. After hanging up, she did a deeper background check on the photographer. His credentials seemed legitimate. His work appeared in National Geographic and similar publications. Nothing in his public record raised immediate red flags, but his early departure from the campground still nagged at her. The next day, Cooper met with Ethan Hargrove, Lily's 14-year-old brother, at a coffee shop near his school. Seth and Andrea had agreed to the meeting, though they'd chosen not to attend, giving Ethan space to speak freely. The teenager sat across from Cooper, his hands wrapped around a hot chocolate he wasn't drinking. His eyes, the same hazel as his sister's in the family photos, were shadowed by lack of sleep and the weight of premature grief. "I want to ask about the morning before Lily disappeared," Cooper said gently. "Did you notice anything unusual around the campsite? Anyone paying special attention to your family, particularly to Lily?" Ethan stared into his cooling drink. "There was a guy with cameras. He was set up near our campsite that morning, taking pictures of birds or something. Dad talked to him for a while about his equipment. Do you remember what he looked like? Older than Dad, gray in his beard. He had this vest with lots of pockets. Seemed normal, I guess." Ethan finally took a sip of his chocolate. "But there was something ... I don't know. Lily said something about him that I didn't think about until later." Cooper leaned forward. "What did she say?" "She said he took her picture. Not like creepy or anything. She was looking at a salamander she found, and he asked if he could photograph her with it for his nature series. Something about children connecting with wildlife." Ethan's voice cracked slightly. She was excited about it. "Said maybe she'd be in a magazine someday." Cooper kept her expression neutral despite the alarm bells ringing in her mind. "Did your parents know about this interaction?" Ethan shook his head. "It happened when they were packing up the car for our hike. It was just for a minute. I didn't think it was important." "Did you mention this to the police during the investigation?" "They never asked," Ethan said, guilt flashing across his face. "They were so focused on the cougar theory. All their questions were about whether Lily might have approached a wild animal or wandered off trail." Cooper thanked Ethan for his time, promising to keep him updated on her investigation. As she drove home, her mind raced with the implications of this new information. A wildlife photographer with a specific interest in big cats had been at the campground, had interacted with Lily, and had left abruptly after her disappearance. It wasn't proof of anything, but it certainly warranted closer scrutiny. That evening, Cooper contacted Dr. Frost again to ask about photographers who specialized in predator documentation. "It's a small community," Dr. Frost explained. "Most are legitimate conservationists or artists, but there have been scandals photographers who stage shots, who bait animals, even a few who've released captive predators into an area to get the perfect action shot. Could someone with expertise in big cat behavior effectively stage a scene to mimic a cougar attack?" Dr. Frost was quiet for a moment. "Unfortunately, yes. Someone who understands predator behavior and forensics could potentially create a convincing tableau, but they'd need to know what investigators look for: drag patterns, blood evidence, scatter radius. Like someone who's been following predator attacks for years, documenting them?" "Exactly like that," Dr. Frost confirmed. "The question is, why would anyone go to such lengths?" It was the question that had been troubling Cooper as well. If Martin Ridley or anyone else had harmed Lily and staged a cougar attack as cover, what was the motive? Predators of the human variety typically had clear patterns and motivations: opportunity, sexual deviance, financial gain, revenge. What would drive someone to such an elaborate scheme? Cooper delved into research on Olympic National Forest's history, looking for similar incidents or patterns. The park had experienced 3 other disappearances in the past decade: an elderly hiker with dementia who was never found, a college student who later turned up in Seattle with no memory of how he'd gotten there, attributed to a psychotic episode, and a 6-year-old boy who had wandered away from his family and was found deceased 2 days later, the victim of exposure and a fall. None of these cases had been attributed to wildlife predation, and none seemed connected to Lily's disappearance. But as Cooper expanded her search to other national parks in the Pacific Northwest, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. In Mount Rainier National Park, 5 years earlier, a 9-year-old girl had vanished during a family camping trip. After a 12-day search, authorities concluded she had been attacked by a bear. Based on torn clothing and trace blood evidence found near a bear den, no body was ever recovered. In North Cascades National Park, 3 years before that, an 11-year-old boy disappeared while hiking with his scout troop. A week later, scattered belongings and blood evidence led investigators to attribute the disappearance to a wolf attack. Again, no remains were found. Cooper created a spreadsheet, noting the similarities. All children between 6 and 12 years old, all disappearing from remote camping areas, all eventually attributed to predator attacks despite minimal physical evidence and no recoverable remains. In each case, the investigation had focused exclusively on the wildlife predation theory after the initial evidence was discovered. She reached out to the families of these children, expecting resistance. Instead, she found them eager to share their experiences, united by the particular anguish of having no body to bury, no definitive closure. They found Jamie's jacket with some blood on it and just decided that was it. A bear got him, said Monica Lewin, mother of the boy who disappeared in North Cascades. But Jamie knew about bear safety. We drilled it into him since he could walk. And he was with his troop, not alone. How does a bear single out one child from a group without anyone seeing anything? Similar doubts haunted the parents of the girl from Mount Rainier. They never explained how Sophia's hair clip ended up half a mile from where her jacket was found, her father said. Bears don't collect souvenirs. Cooper brought her findings to Andrea Hargrove, spreading her research across the family's dining table. Ethan was at school, and Seth was at work his first week back since Lily's disappearance. You think these cases are connected? Andrea asked, her fingers tracing the photos of the other missing children. The hope and dread in her voice were palpable. I think they deserve a closer look, Cooper said carefully. The pattern is too specific to ignore. Children of similar ages, similar evidence patterns, all attributed to different predators despite inconsistencies. Andrea's hands trembled as she studied the documents. What are you saying? That someone is taking children and making it look like animal attacks? I don't have enough evidence to make that claim definitively. But I believe the wildlife explanation was accepted too quickly in all these cases, including Lily's. Andrea stood abruptly, moving to a shelf where dozens of Lily's notebooks were carefully arranged. She selected one and returned to the table, opening it to reveal meticulous drawings of plants and wildlife, each labeled in a child's careful handwriting. Lily documented everything, Andrea said. It wasn't just a hobby, it was how she processed the world. If she saw something important that day, it would be in her last journal. Cooper had reviewed copies of the final journal entries provided in the police report, but now she examined the original notebook recovered from the scene. Lily's last entry about the chanterelle mushroom seemed ordinary, but as Cooper turned the page, she noticed something odd, a faint impression visible on the blank page, as if Lily had pressed hard while writing on a previous sheet that had been removed. Do you have a pencil? Cooper asked. When Andrea brought one, Cooper lightly shaded across the blank page, a technique she'd used countless times to reveal impressions left on underlying paper. Gradually, words began to emerge, not a complete entry, but fragments. Following again today. Doubleton what appeared to be same man from the rest was too faint to decipher, but it was enough to send a chill through Cooper. Had Lily noticed someone following her before her disappearance? Had a page been deliberately removed from her journal? Cooper asked Andrea if she could take the journal to have it examined by a forensic document specialist she knew. Andrea agreed immediately, the first spark of real hope in her eyes since they'd met. "If someone took my daughter," she said, her voice hardening, "I want to know. No matter what happened to her, I need the truth." Cooper's next step was to obtain the complete case files from the other national park disappearances. Using her law enforcement contacts, she managed to secure redacted copies of the investigations into the Mount Rainier and North Cascades incidents. The similarities to Lily's case were even more striking than initial reports had suggested. In all three cases, a wildlife photographer or naturalist had been documented in the vicinity shortly before the disappearance. In the Mount Rainier case, a visiting wildlife researcher had given a presentation on bear safety at the campground amphitheater the night before Sophia went missing. In North Cascades, a conservation photographer had been profiling the scout troop for a magazine article about youth outdoor education. Cooper checked the names against park records, finding different identities in each case. But when she cross-referenced dates and locations with Martin Ridley's published work and exhibition history, she found that he had been in the general vicinity during each incident, with photographs from those parks appearing in his portfolio dated within weeks of the disappearances. It wasn't conclusive evidence. Ridley was a renowned wildlife photographer who regularly visited national parks across the country. His presence in these areas could be entirely coincidental, but combined with Ethan's recollection of Ridley photographing Lily and his abrupt departure after her disappearance, it justified further investigation. Cooper tried calling Ridley again, but his number went straight to voicemail. His website now indicated he was on an extended assignment in Glacier National Park documenting mountain lion behavior. Cooper felt a growing sense of urgency. If her suspicions about Ridley were correct, other children could be at risk. She compiled her evidence and presented it to Sheriff Coleman, who had overseen the official investigation into Lily's disappearance. His initial reaction was dismissive. "Ms. Cooper, with all due respect to your background, we conducted a thorough investigation. The evidence pointed clearly to a cougar attack. These connections you're drawing seem tenuous at best. 3 children disappear in 3 different national parks, all eventually attributed to different predators despite similar evidence patterns. And in all 3 locations, the same wildlife photographer happens to be working in the vicinity," Cooper countered. "That doesn't strike you as worthy of investigation?" Coleman sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Look, I understand the family's need for answers. Hell, I understand your interest as someone who writes about these cases. But sometimes the simplest explanation is the correct one. We found physical evidence linking the cougar to Lily. We had expert testimony confirming the predation theory. Experts who were shown selective evidence," Cooper argued. "No one questioned why a cougar would scatter the victim's belongings in a way that practically guaranteed they would be found. No one examined the possibility that the blood evidence was planted. And apparently, no one thought it relevant that a wildlife photographer with expertise in big cat behavior had interacted with Lily shortly before she vanished." The sheriff's expression shifted subtly. Ridley was interviewed. He provided a statement and left contact information. Did anyone follow up? Check his background? Verify his movements that day? Coleman's silence was answer enough. "I'm not asking you to reopen the case based on my theories," Cooper said, softening her approach. "I'm asking you to look at specific evidence that may have been overlooked. The impression in Lily's journal suggesting she was being followed. The coincidental presence of Ridley at multiple disappearance sites. The inconsistencies in the predation evidence that even wildlife experts find troubling." After a long moment, Coleman nodded reluctantly. I'll review what you found. No promises beyond that. And Cooper, if you're pursuing this Ridley angle, be careful. If there's even a chance you're right, you're dealing with someone dangerous." Cooper left the sheriff's office with mixed feelings. She'd gotten a foot in the door, but knew that bureaucratic inertia and the department's investment in their original conclusion would make any official reconsideration an uphill battle. She decided to approach the investigation from another angle. If Ridley was indeed targeting children in national parks, he would need to scout locations, observe potential victims, and establish his presence as a legitimate visitor with a reasonable purpose for being there. This preparation would leave Trace's accommodations booked, permits filed, interactions with park staff and visitors. Cooper traveled to Mount Rainier National Park, where Sophia had disappeared 5 years earlier. The park's visitor center maintained records of professional photographers who had applied for special use permits required for anyone conducting commercial photography in national parks. Martin Ridley had indeed obtained such a permit 3 weeks before Sophia's disappearance, listing his project as Ursine Behaviors in Human Adjacent Habitats. The permit application included his vehicle information, a dark green Jeep Wrangler with Montana plates. Cooper checked with the park's entrance log and discovered that Ridley's vehicle had entered the park multiple times in the 2 weeks leading up to Sophia's disappearance, including the day before she went missing. More tellingly, the vehicle had exited the park at 5:43 a.m. the morning after the disappearance, well before sunrise. Cooper interviewed the park ranger who had been on duty at the entrance station that morning. "I remember that Jeep," the ranger confirmed after consulting his old logs. "Odd time to be leaving. Guy said he was trying to catch the morning light for landscape shots at another location. Seemed in a hurry. Did you notice anything unusual about the vehicle? Any passengers? Extra equipment?" The ranger thought for a moment. "Nothing specific comes to mind. It was still dark, just using the booth lights. He had a lot of gear in the back, which wasn't unusual for a photographer. Kept his window barely cracked when he handed me his pass, didn't chat like he had on previous days. It wasn't damning evidence, but it added to the pattern Cooper was seeing Ridley establishing his presence before each disappearance, then making a quick exit afterward. She needed more, something concrete that would compel law enforcement to take a closer look at the photographer. Cooper's next move was to investigate Ridley's background more thoroughly. Public records revealed he had grown up in Eastern Oregon, the son of a Forest Service employee and a nurse. He had studied wildlife biology at Oregon State University, but never completed his degree. Instead, he had built a career as a self-taught wildlife photographer, gradually gaining recognition for his intimate portraits of predator behavior. His criminal record was clean, not even a traffic violation in the past decade. His financial situation appeared stable but not extravagant, with income from book sales, magazine commissions, and speaking engagements. Nothing in his public profile suggested someone capable of abduction or worse. Cooper tracked down a former girlfriend, a wildlife rehabilitation specialist who had dated Ridley for nearly 2 years before breaking off the relationship. After some hesitation, she agreed to meet at a cafe in Seattle. Martin was intense, she explained, keeping her voice low despite the cafe's ambient noise. Obsessed with predators, especially big cats. He related to them more than to people. Said they were pure in their intentions, unlike humans. Did he ever show unusual interest in children? Or express strange ideas about them? The woman frowned, considering the question. Not in a way that seemed inappropriate at the time. He talked about wanting to document how children interact with wilderness. Said they had an instinctive respect for predators that adults lose. He was working on a project photographs juxtaposing children with predator environments. Said it represented innocence in the face of nature's reality. Did you ever see any of these photographs? A few preliminary shots. Children at the edges of forests, looking into shadows. He was very protective of the project, said it wasn't ready to share widely. She paused, discomfort visible on her face. There was one night, after he'd been drinking, when he talked about his theory that certain children are drawn to predators, that there's an almost mystical connection between them. He called them offerings to the wild. I thought it was just photographers' pretentiousness, but looking back, it was disturbing. Cooper asked if she'd been with Ridley during any of the time periods corresponding to the disappearances she was investigating. The woman confirmed that they had been together during the North Cascades incident, but had broken up before the Mount Rainier and Olympic National Forest cases. "Do you think Martin could be involved in something criminal?" she asked as Cooper prepared to leave. Cooper chose her words carefully. "I'm exploring all possibilities in some cold cases." His name has come up tangentially. "It may be nothing." The woman nodded slowly. "After we broke up, he sent me some of his new work trying to impress me, I think. There was one photo that always bothered me. A child's shoe half buried in forest debris. The composition was perfect too perfect. I asked where he took it, and he said, where the forest claims its tributes. I thought it was his typical cryptic artist talk. But now I wonder ... double quotes. Cooper felt a chill. "Do you still have this photo?" I deleted his email after we broke up. But it might be in his portfolio. It was titled Offerings, Study 3, I think. That evening, Cooper scoured Ridley's online portfolio, professional social media accounts, and published works, looking for any image matching that description. She found nothing publicly available, but noticed that his website mentioned a limited edition folio called Wilderness Tributes that was only available for private collectors. Cooper contacted Andrea Hargrove with an update on her investigation. As they spoke, a notification appeared on Cooper's phone, an email from an anonymous account. The subject line read simply, "About Martin Ridley." The email contained no text, only an attachment, a photograph of a small hiking boot partially buried under forest debris. The same boot that had been discovered in the search for Lily Hargrove. But this photograph hadn't been taken during the search. The angle, lighting, and composition were too perfect, too deliberate. It was a professional shot, taken before the search teams ever arrived. At the bottom of the image was a small watermark, Mar Nature Studies. Cooper stared at the screen, her suspicions crystallizing into certainty. Someone, perhaps Ridley's ex-girlfriend, perhaps someone else who knew his work, was confirming her worst fears. The scattered evidence of Lily's presence hadn't been the result of a cougar attack. It had been carefully arranged by human hands, photographed as some kind of twisted art, and left to be discovered. The wildlife predation theory that had seemed so plausible to investigators had been an elaborate misdirection, crafted by someone who understood both predator behavior and investigative procedures. Someone who had created a pattern of staged disappearances across multiple parks, using America's wild predators as both inspiration and cover for his actions. The question now was not whether Martin Ridley was involved in Lily's disappearance, but how to prove it, and whether Lily or any of the other missing children might somehow, against all odds, still be alive. Cooper forwarded the photograph to Sheriff Coleman immediately, then called him to ensure he understood its significance. "This isn't just evidence suggesting Ridley's involvement," she explained. "It's proof that the scene was staged. That boot was photographed professionally before search teams found it. The timestamp metadata in the image file predates the discovery by nearly 12 hours." Coleman's response was measured but urgent. "I'm putting together a task force with the FBI. We'll need your complete files on the other cases you've connected to Ridley." Within 24 hours, Cooper found herself in a conference room at the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, surrounded by law enforcement officials from multiple jurisdictions. FBI Special Agent Navarro, who had been involved in the original search for Lily, now led the federal component of the investigation. "We've been building a profile based on this Cooper's research," Navarro began, addressing the assembled team. Martin Ridley, 54, wildlife photographer specializing in predator documentation. No criminal record, well respected in conservation circles. But his movements coincide with 3 child disappearances across 3 different national parks, all eventually attributed to animal attacks despite minimal physical evidence. Photos of the 3 missing children, Lily Hargrove, Sophia Reeves, and Jamie Lewin, were projected onto a screen, alongside a professional headshot of Ridley from his website biography. The photograph Ms. Cooper received anonymously is our strongest evidence, Navarro continued. Forensic analysis confirms it was taken with a Nikon D850 using a specific lens that matches equipment Ridley is known to use. The metadata indicates it was captured approximately 10 hours before search teams discovered the boot. A detective from the Washington State Patrol raised his hand. Do we know who sent the anonymous email? Not yet, Cooper admitted. But I've been in touch with Ridley's former girlfriend. She described a similar photograph he shared with her after their breakup. She may have sent it, or it could be someone else who's seen his private collection. What's his current location? Sheriff Coleman asked. Agent Navarro clicked to a new slide showing a map. His last known location was Glacier National Park, Montana, where he claimed to be working on a mountain lion project. However, park authorities have no record of him checking in for his scheduled permit this week. His cell phone is either turned off or outside service areas. We're tracking his credit card activity and have an alert on his vehicle. The investigation accelerated over the next 48 hours. Warrants were issued for Ridley's financial records, communication data, and properties. Cooper worked alongside law enforcement, providing insights from her research and helping connect seemingly disparate elements of the emerging case. Ridley's bank records revealed a pattern of purchases that raised additional concerns. Specialized tranquilizer darts typically used in wildlife research, soundproofing materials, and remote camera equipment, all purchased in the weeks preceding each disappearance. His credit card had last been used 3 days earlier at a gas station in eastern Montana near the Idaho border. Most significantly, investigators discovered that Ridley owned a remote property in the Cabinet Mountains of northwestern Montana, a 5-acre parcel with a cabin and outbuildings, accessible only by a private Forest Service road. The property was listed under a shell company named Wilderness Tributes LLC, matching the title of his private photography collection. We need to move on this location immediately, Agent Navarro stated during the next briefing. Given the time elapsed since Lily's disappearance and the pattern we're seeing with the other cases, there's a possibility that Ridley has kept the victims alive. The statement sent a ripple through the room. Until that moment, the investigation had largely proceeded under the grim assumption that they were dealing with homicide cases. The possibility, however remote, that any of the children might still be alive changed the urgency and approach of their operation. Cooper asked the question everyone was thinking. What evidence suggests they might be alive? Navarro hesitated before responding. We've been analyzing Ridley's professional output since the first disappearance. There's a private subscription website where he shares exclusive content with high-paying collectors. Most of it is legitimate wildlife photography, but there's a password-protected section called The Human Element that our technical team just accessed. She paused, gathering herself. The content includes photographs of children in wilderness settings. The children appear to be sedated but alive, positioned in carefully constructed scenes with implicit predator presence, a shadow suggesting a mountain lion, claw marks on nearby trees, etc. The most recent uploads include images that appear to be Lily Hargrove, dated just 2 weeks ago. The revelation stunned the room. Andrea Hargrove, who had been invited to this particular briefing, let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp of hope. You're saying my daughter might be alive? After all this time? Navarro chose her words carefully. We can't promise anything, Mrs. Hargrove, but these photographs give us reason to believe. Ridley has been keeping his victims alive for his project. The images don't show the children's faces clearly, but the physical characteristics match, and the timestamps are recent. Cooper studied Navarro's expression, reading between the lines. The agent was offering hope while preparing everyone for what they might actually find. The reality of what any child kept captive for months or years might have endured was too horrific to articulate in that moment. By dawn the next morning, a joint task force of FBI agents, local law enforcement, and wilderness tactical experts was approaching Ridley's remote Montana property. Cooper had been allowed to accompany them as a consultant, though she was required to remain with the command post established a mile from the target location. Satellite imagery had revealed a main cabin, 2 smaller outbuildings, and what appeared to be a partially underground structure built into a hillside. The property was surrounded by dense forest, with a single access road and no neighboring residences within 5 miles. The tactical team approached silently through the pre-dawn forest, using thermal imaging to detect any heat signatures. They identified 3 distinct signatures, 1 in the main cabin and 2 in the underground structure. As the team prepared to move in, a sudden gunshot echoed through the mountains. The operation shifted instantly from stealth to emergency assault. Teams converged on the buildings, breaking down doors and securing rooms with practiced efficiency. Cooper listened to the tactical communications from the command post, her heart racing as fragmented updates came through. Main cabin secured. 1 adult male down with self-inflicted gunshot wound. Still breathing. Medic requested. Moving to underground structure. Heavy security door. Breaching equipment needed. Door breached. 2 signatures confirmed. Medical team standby. The minutes stretched like hours as Cooper waited for news. Finally, Agent Navarro's voice came through clearly. We have them. 2 minors recovered alive. Medical assessment underway. Repeat, 2 alive. The wave of emotion that swept through the command post was palpable. But Cooper, trained by years of homicide investigation, noted what wasn't being said. They had found 2 children, not 3. And the logistics didn't add up. If these were victims from disappearances spanning 5 years, they would no longer all be minors. Sophia Reeves would now be 14, Jamie Lewin 16. As medical helicopters approached to transport the rescued children and the wounded suspect, Cooper pulled Agent Navarro aside. 2 children, Cooper said. Not 3. Who did they find? Navarro's expression was grim. Lily Hargrove and a boy approximately 8 years old. We haven't identified him yet, but he doesn't match the description of Jamie Lewin. This might be a victim we weren't aware of. And the others? We're still searching the property. There's a lot of ground to cover, including what appears to be a photography studio in one of the outbuildings. The reality of what they discovered was both better and worse than anyone had anticipated. 2 children rescued alive was a miracle by any standard of such investigations. But the fact that one was not among the known victims suggested Ridley's activities might be more extensive than they had realized. Cooper accompanied Agent Navarro to the hospital where the children had been transported. Martin Ridley had also been taken there, his self-inflicted gunshot wound to the chest requiring immediate surgery. His prognosis was uncertain. In a private waiting area, Andrea Hargrove sat rigidly in a chair, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Seth stood by the window, staring out but seeing nothing. Both turned as Cooper and Navarro entered. She's alive, Andrea said, her voice barely audible. They've sedated her for the trip, but the doctor says physically she seems okay. The unspoken question hung in the air. What about mentally, emotionally? What had Lily endured during the 9 months of her captivity? Navarro addressed this gently. We don't know the full extent of what she experienced yet. From what we found at the property, it appears Ridley kept the children sedated much of the time, using drugs he obtained through his wildlife research connections. They were posed for photographs in natural settings, then returned to the underground facility. Posed? Seth repeated, the word clearly inadequate for whatever horror his imagination was supplying. We believe his focus was the photography itself, Navarro clarified. The evidence suggests a disturbed artistic obsession rather than other forms of abuse. But we won't know for certain until the children can be properly examined and, when appropriate, interviewed. The explanation offered cold comfort, but it was something. The possibility that Lily had been kept primarily in a sedated state during her captivity meant she might have been spared the full psychological trauma of her situation. Over the next several days, as Lily remained under medical care, the investigation at Ridley's property yielded disturbing revelations. The underground facility had been designed specifically for holding captives. 2 small rooms with beds, a bathroom, and a rudimentary kitchen, all behind a heavy security door that could only be opened from the outside. The outbuilding, converted to a photography studio, contained thousands of photographs, both digital and printed. They documented what Ridley called his Wilderness Tribute series, children positioned in natural settings to create the illusion of peaceful coexistence with predators. Sometimes the predators were visibly present but tranquilized. In other images, they were implied through staging and shadow. Most disturbing was Ridley's journal, which outlined his deranged philosophy. He believed certain children possessed a spiritual connection to apex predators and served as bridges between human and wild consciousness. In his mind, he wasn't harming the children but elevating them to a higher purpose, capturing the moment of perfect harmony between innocence and primal nature. The journal also provided the devastating answer to Cooper's question about the other missing children. Jamie Lewin had died approximately 6 months after his abduction from an unexpected reaction to the sedatives Ridley used. Rather than risk discovery by seeking medical help, Ridley had staged the scene that searchers eventually found, scattering the boy's clothing and personal items to suggest a wolf attack. Sophia Reeves had survived longer, nearly 2 years in captivity, before attempting to escape during one of Ridley's photo sessions in Yellowstone National Park. According to Ridley's disturbing account, she had run directly into a genuinely wild grizzly bear's territory. Whether the bear had actually attacked her remained unclear from his writings, but Ridley had subsequently staged evidence of a bear attack near her original disappearance site in Mount Rainier, creating a retroactive explanation for searchers. The 8-year-old boy found with Lily was identified as Connor Mills, who had disappeared from Rocky Mountain National Park 4 months earlier, a case that hadn't connected to the others in Cooper's research because it had been classified as a suspected parental abduction due to an ongoing custody dispute. Martin Ridley survived his suicide attempt but remained in a medically induced coma. Federal prosecutors were preparing multiple charges, including kidnapping, child endangerment, evidence tampering, and murder. The investigation expanded to include other missing children cases in wilderness areas across the country, with particular attention to those attributed to animal attacks. 3 weeks after her rescue, Lily Hargrove was cleared to return home. Her physical recovery had progressed well, though she remained unusually quiet and startled easily at sudden movements or sounds. The psychological healing would take much longer. Cooper visited the Hargrove home on Lily's first day back. The family had requested her presence, feeling that the person who had refused to accept the cougar explanation deserved to witness the outcome of her persistence. The Lily who sat in the living room bore little resemblance to the vibrant child from the family photos. She was thinner, paler, her movements careful and contained. But when Cooper mentioned finding the impression in her journal that had helped break the case, a flash of the old Lily emerged. "I knew someone was watching me," she said, her first unprompted comment since returning home. "I wrote it down because that's what scientists do, document observations." The simple statement brought tears to Andrea's eyes, a glimpse of the methodical, curious daughter she remembered. Later, as Cooper prepared to leave, Andrea walked her to the door. "How did you know?" she asked quietly. "When everyone was so certain it was the cougar, what made you doubt?" Cooper considered the question. It wasn't any one thing. It was the totality of small inconsistencies. The staging felt too perfect, too deliberate. Predators don't create narratives. People do. Once I started questioning the predator theory, the alternative became increasingly clear. Andrea nodded, glancing back toward the living room where Lily sat with her father and brother. The night before she disappeared, Lily told me something about that photographer we met at the campsite. She said he showed her pictures of other children in the woods. Kids like me who understand animals, she called them. I didn't think anything of it then. It seemed harmless, a photographer sharing his work. You couldn't have known, Cooper assured her. That's the thing about predators, isn't it? Andrea said, her gaze distant. The most dangerous ones don't look dangerous at all. In the months that followed, Martin Ridley was charged with 3 counts of kidnapping, 2 counts of murder, and numerous other felonies. He eventually pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty, receiving multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. His full confession provided closure for the families of Jamie Lewin and Sophia Reeves, whose remains were recovered based on information he provided. The case prompted a nationwide review of missing persons cases in national parks and wilderness areas, particularly those attributed to animal attacks with minimal physical evidence. 2 additional cases were identified as likely having been staged by Ridley, though without his cooperation, investigators had little hope of resolving them completely. Cooper's book about the case, Perfect Predator: The Martin Ridley Deception, became a bestseller and led to increased training for wilderness search and rescue teams on distinguishing genuine animal predation from staged scenes. Wildlife forensic protocols were enhanced to include more rigorous verification of predator involvement in disappearances and deaths. For the Hargrove family, recovery remained an ongoing process. Lily gradually returned to school, though she no longer kept nature journals and showed no interest in visiting the forests she had once loved. The family relocated to a suburb of Chicago, far from the mountains and woods of the Pacific Northwest. 1 year after Lily's rescue, Cooper received a package containing a new journal, its pages filled with careful observations not of plants or animals, but of the urban environment. Descriptions of city birds, detailed notes on how sunlight reflected off skyscrapers, methodical documentation of seasonal changes in a neighborhood park. The last page held a simple note in Lily's handwriting. I'm still observing. Just different things now. For Cooper, it was a powerful reminder that while Ridley had attempted to exploit the connection between children and nature for his disturbed purposes, he had ultimately failed to destroy it. Lily had found her own way to reclaim the observational skills that had once brought her joy, adapting them to her new reality. The wildlife predation narrative that had seemed so convincing had been carefully constructed by a human predator who understood both the natural world and the investigative process. But in the end, it was human persistence, cooperation, and the refusal to accept simple explanations that had revealed the truth. During a follow-up investigation at Olympic National Forest, wildlife biologists located and monitored the cougar that had been initially blamed for Lily's disappearance. The animal continued to roam its territory, hunting deer and avoiding human contact, an unwitting scapegoat in Ridley's elaborate deception. Park officials decided against relocating it, instead using its presence to educate visitors about actual cougar behavior versus the myths that had been exploited in the case. The lesson was clear. In the wilderness of human experience, the most dangerous predators are rarely those with claws and fangs. They are those who walk among us unnoticed, camouflaged by respectability and expertise, hunting with patience and calculation rather than instinct. As the seasonal rains returned to Olympic National Forest, washing away the last physical traces of the search for Lily Hargrove, the mountains held their secrets close. The forest remained what it had always been, neither malevolent nor benign, but simply wild, a place where humans were visitors rather than masters. The tragedy that had unfolded beneath its canopy had been entirely human in origin, the wilderness merely its backdrop and unwilling accomplice. For those who had lived through the ordeal, the investigators, the families, the children who survived, the forest would never again be simply a place of beauty and adventure. It would forever carry the shadow of what had happened there, a reminder of vulnerability and resilience, of darkness and light, of the capacity for both cruelty and compassion that defines the human experience. In her Chicago bedroom, Lily Hargrove kept her new journal on a shelf beside her window, where she could observe the city below. She no longer ventured into the woods, but she had not stopped seeing the world with the careful attention that had once made her an exceptional young naturalist. She had simply shifted her gaze, finding patterns and connections in the urban landscape that others might miss. And sometimes, when the city fell quiet and the light faded, she would open her window and listen not for the rustle of leaves or the call of birds, but for the distant sounds of human life continuing around her. It was in its way, its own kind of wilderness complex, unpredictable, sometimes dangerous, but ultimately where she now belonged. The cougar theory had been nothing more than an elaborate misdirection, a smokescreen created by a disturbed human mind to conceal very human crimes. In exposing this deception, Cooper and the investigators had achieved something rare in cases of such complexity. They had brought the truth to light and, against overwhelming odds, returned a child to her family. For Cooper, who had dedicated her career to finding justice for those who could no longer speak for themselves, Lily's return was a singular victory. Not all stories ended this way. Not all investigations yielded such clear answers or allowed for any measure of healing. But this one had, and in a world often defined by uncertainty and loss, that counted for everything. As Cooper completed her book about the case, she found herself returning to something Lily had said during one of their conversations. The scariest thing wasn't being in the dark. It was when he told me no one was looking for me anymore because they all thought an animal got me. The statement haunted Cooper, a stark reminder of why she had refused to accept the cougar explanation from the beginning. Sometimes the greatest threat to justice wasn't the criminal, but the premature certainty that a case was solved. In questioning what everyone else had accepted, she had opened the door to a truth that might otherwise have remained hidden forever. It was a lesson Cooper would carry forward to other cases. Other mysteries where official explanations felt too neat, too convenient. The wilderness might harbor many dangers, but the most insidious predators would always be those hiding in plain sight, cloaked in normalcy, counting on our willingness to believe that monsters belong only to the wild, never to the civilized world we think we know.